Okay, introduction to research design. What does this mean? It means you define a research question and you define the purpose of the study. You define the methodology, which can be quantitative, qualitative, or mixed, the things that we talked about right here. And the specific plans for collecting and analyzing data, the things that we talked in this stage. You determine the topic, you formulate an assumption, the models, prepare the research plan, you collect data, etc. And so there's an exemplary research here. It's social media use and academic performance. The research question: does daily social media usage affect university students' academic success? Methodology: quantitative survey, data collection, online questionnaire of 200 students, analysis, correlation analysis. You just figured out a bunch of stuff out. It's just outlining how you will conduct the study. First is you determine the research topic. Now, if you make the topic too broad, then it will be impossible to effectively measure. Therefore, you make it narrowed and measurable. You also want to make it easy to research. So there needs to be data available for you to actually use. And you need to also be able to reach a conclusion. So it needs to be something that's realistic. It also needs to be applicable in the scientific field. So it needs to fill a scientific gap while providing societal benefits, kind of like in applied research. So, and it needs to be novel. I don't know what novel means, to be honest. I wanted to pause like that because I have no idea. If you know what novelty means in this context, please do tell me because I don't know. Now we look at different types of research designs. First, we look at quantitative research design. I've learned how to say quantitative now, and it's the deductive approach. First of all, you look at the literature. What kind of data do you have? And then you find out the research question and objectives, and then you formulate a hypothesis. What was a hypothesis? It was a provisional answer to the research question, and it predicts an outcome. Now, the outcome prediction is important because we are using the null hypothesis, which assumes that there is no relationship between these two data. So the way it works is it uses a similar logic to the legal principle of presumption of innocence. What does it mean? It means innocent until proven guilty. This means what the in the null question, you say T doesn't affect sleep quality, okay? But I have a hypothesis based on the research that I've done that says otherwise. I I do a hypothesis saying if you drink tea, your sleep quality will be worse, or it will affect your sleep. It will make you unable to go to sleep. That is H1, my hypothesis. If my hypothesis comes out to be true, then I reject the null hypothesis because it's not based on reality. My hypothesis is better, stronger. Just it just mogs the null hypothesis. We use variables when dealing with quantitative research. What are the independent variables and what are the dependent variables? Well, for example, when we want to look at is students' choice of university related to the type of high school they graduated from? The independent variable is the type of high school. and the dependent variable is choice of university. You see, this is the cause, yeah, and this is the effect because this choice of university depends on the type of high school the students went to. Therefore, this is dependent and this is independent. Now, in some of the researchers, in some of the fields, there are more complex relationships where there is an intervening variable. We call these a mediating variable. It explains the link between the independent and the dependent variables. For example, does smartphone addiction influence sleep quality? Smartphone addiction is the independent variable, sleep quality is the dependent variable, and stress level is the intervening variable. Because you see, does smartphone addiction influence sleep quality? We don't exactly see stress level being defined, but it's also the cause of why you may not be able to sleep, for example. Of course, blue light and other stuff also has an effect, but this is basically an explanatory variable that creates the link between these. I think it makes sense. We explained the null hypothesis, and then there's the theoretical framework. It determines hypotheses, concepts, causal relationships, and when you test a hypothesis, you're actually testing the theory. So, what does this mean? It means, for example, we take social learning theory. The social learning theory posits that when you take a role model and you will be subconsciously or unconsciously learning from that model and replicating what they are doing. It's social learning. Now, when you conduct a hypothesis like students who observe successful role models are more motivated academically, you're actually challenging the theory of Bandura because you're basically saying if this guy's theory is true, then my hypothesis should also come out to be true. Does it make sense? Yes. Now, moving on to qualitative research design. This is the inductive approach. What was it? It was actually the creation of the theory. It's associated with conceptual thinking, interpretation, and theory building. Yeah. And it's especially regarding topics with very little known information. The qualitative approach views reality as multidimensional and relies on constructivism, which assumes that individuals perceive the world differently based on cultural contexts. What have we been talking about? Interpretivism. Interpretivism. It's nominalist. Reality is subjective. That's the main message. And unlike the rigid steps of quantitative research, the qualitative process is fluid. Each stage provides feedback to the other steps. The theoretical basis shifts depending on the specific problem being examined. For example, to study experiences of international students in Istanbul, a researcher might use in depth interviews with a sample of 5 students to understand their cultural adaptation. It can be argued that this gives you much more data than if you just conducted a survey on 200 people because you're going in depth into their specific experiences. Now, moving on to mixed methods, uh, it operates on pragmatism. What is pragmatism? It allows researchers to draw freely from both approaches to attain knowledge. Now, pragmatism basically means to take the side that's, you find value in things that seem invaluable, or you try to see the cup as half full. You try to see how you can use anything. That's kind of like pragmatism. I really couldn't understand. I really couldn't explain it, but basically, you try to pick the best things out of anything. You try to see the value in bad things. For example, while quantitative research relies on positivism, qualitative on constructivism, mixed methods rely on pragmatism, as we talked about. Now, there are three implementation strategies. One is sequential. Surveys show stress, interviews explore why. You see, we used first a quantitative research method, what was a survey, and then we use interviews, which are qualitative, to explore why. You can see why this is the best approach. And there's also concurrent. For example, you measure the screen time with a questionnaire plus technology experience interviews. So you first hand out surveys and then you further question those people with interviews. This is crazy. Transformative is using both methods guided by a specific social or political perspective, like social justice or feminist theory, to promote social change. I don't understand this. For example, surveying the frequency of discrimination against migrant workers while interviewing them about personal experiences to promote reform. It just seems the same as concurrent, but I guess this has a bigger value, that being social change. So if you see transformative, it means there's something about feminism or world change or the indomitable spirit of humans or something like that. I'm not too sure. If you can explain to me, I would like it. Ethics and presentation of findings. Oh, in the quantitative approach, you show your neutrality through objectivity and reliable measurements. You present it in the standard process, statistical analyses, tables, graphs, nerd stuff, basically. You report your findings in the findings section. Who came up with this? Amazing. And you show the external validity in the conclusion and discussion section of your paper, I guess. And in the qualitative approach, you show your neutrality through social understanding, empathy, and detachment. In the neutrality method, we understand social life and its natural flow. And we balance empathy with detachment. Amazing. And the validation process is achieved through self discipline, honesty, and comparison with other observers. I think the most objective part of this is comparison with other observers. I would believe so, at least. The presentation format is in like a web like structure, apparently. It's sharing unaltered maps, photographs, quotes to evoke a shared feeling. It gives you an indomitable human spirit kind of vibe. I'm not sure. And of course, we are locked in. Thank you, Cat, of locked inness.